Rabies and germs, welcome to NJ Today. My name's McConnaughay, and you're watching this on Mishmashers.com. Like many of you, I have always been a big fan of Batman, whether it be Batman the Animated Series, the Justice League series, or the Batman Beyond that followed. I thoroughly enjoyed Tim Burton's Batman Returns, and even if the film might be god-awful in retrospect, as a kid, I had Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin film blasted on repeat. Bat nipples be damned. Outside from film and television, and of course comic books, until the late 2000s, the Batman character never had a very strong foothold as a video game franchise. I can remember playing Batman Dark Tomorrow, or The Rise of Sin Tzu, or even the Batman Begins video game adaptation that acts as the predecessor to the video game we'll be talking about in this video. If I'm being honest, I don't think I can name a single time that Batman ever brought the goods and delivered something that's reached higher than an enjoyable button masher until 2009's Batman Arkham Asylum showed up and completely revolutionized the perspective on what a superhero video game is capable of, kickstarting, in my opinion, not only the best superhero video game series at the moment, but one of the best video game series of all time. Before Batman visited Arkham, Christopher Nolan brought us The Dark Knight, one of the most critically acclaimed superhero films of all time, bolstering commendable performances across the board, but especially when it comes to Heath Ledger's performance as the Crown Prince of Crime, the Joker. The film grossed over $1 billion at the worldwide box office and posthumously won Heath Ledger an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. I saw the film on a Sunday, having to wait through Friday and Saturday because the movie theater was so greatly encumbered with moviegoers interested in seeing the film. When I left the theater, I enjoyed the film very much, but something I was always curious about was how they didn't have a Dark Knight video game. Nowadays, this isn't a given by any stretch. For instance, Batman vs. Superman didn't receive a video game adaptation, and neither has, say, Black Panther or Wonder Woman. But at the time, Iron Man 1 and 2 received a video game, Captain America did, and Thor did. All the Spider-Man films had, and if we look back with DC, then we'd see that Green Lantern received a video game adaptation, as did Superman Returns. The Batman Begins film received a video game adaptation that, although certainly doesn't hold a candle to the best of them, provided a mostly enjoyable experience through and through. Needless to say, it's curious that the Dark Knight film was never adapted into a video game, and unfortunate because had the actors and actresses involved reprised their roles, we could have seen more lines delivered in Heath Ledger's interpretation of the Joker. The idea of there not being a Dark Knight video game is even more bewildering when you consider that, according to a Newsweek article, the lack of a video game adaptation in time of the movie's release could have meant over $100 million in missed revenue. As it turns out, a video game adaptation for The Dark Knight was originally intended. The adaptation was intended to be developed by Pandemic Studios, which I think most will likely remember for their efforts on the original Star Wars Battlefront video games, as well as the first couple Destroy All Humans video games. But perhaps more relevant in giving us an idea of what we might have seen with the Dark Knight video game, they also developed an underrated gem called The Saboteur. Pandemic Studios initially approached creation of the Dark Knight video game with their mission statement to create a more linear campaign on the order of Batman Begins. Concept art and stills available online detail the darkly lit and moody atmospheres. However, it was soon after decided that they would approach the creation of the Dark Knight video game instead as an open-world Gotham City, hoping to craft something more in line with the world depicted in Nolan's films. This brings us back to The Saboteur, an open-world video game in its own right that implemented its own engine that was intended to be repurposed for the Dark Knight video game as well. And for myself, having played The Saboteur, although a lot of changes would certainly have to be made, it appears it would have made for solid foundation, allowing high-detailed graphics as well as the open-world reach. When I think about The Saboteur, which had smooth driving mechanics, I think how promising it could have been to play as Batman driving around in the Tumbler, a feature that was actually far along in development before the production went belly up. The reason everything fell apart, however, is, in fact, because the game engine itself ultimately wasn't up to snuff as far as frame rate is concerned. This kept them from achieving release in unison with the theatric release of the Dark Knight film, and instead, their projections and deadline were changed to go hand in hand with the home video release for the film. Unfortunately, the amount of glitches and damage that had been done, and them trying to make everything come together, they simply didn't have enough time to meet that release date either. Eventually, Pandemic lost licensing rights to create a Batman adaptation and all of their work, as Pandemic later became defunct amidst their misfortunes. The reason I wanted to talk about the Dark Knight video game adaptation is because I think we might have missed out on one of the rare video game adaptations of a film that succeeded, and I think it shows an interesting course of events as well. Whether it be the vehicular playability it had with the Tumbler, or being able to see Heath Ledger reprise his role as the Joker before his passing, these factors, as well as some of the concept art made available, made it very appetizing to me. Now, I am not naive in regards to my enthusiasm, however, and like many of you, I know that the rushed production and numerous troubles befalling it are textbook examples of the consequences plaguing many adaptations of the sort. Although it would have been cool to see, and even if it would have been twice as good as, say, Batman Begins, and provided us a riveting experience as the Caped Crusader, in all likelihood, it would not even touch the sheer excellence of Batman Arkham Asylum. Which is curious to think about, because if The Dark Knight would have been released on consoles and garnered the profit it was speculated if capable of, chances are that we'd have never seen Rocksteady's interpretation of the character. If the Dark Knight video game delivered, then Warner Bros. Could very well have decided to bring Pandemic back again for a video game adaptation of The Dark Knight Rises. And if that's the case, who knows what the landscape would have been for the Batman character in the video game industry. With that said, the trade-off was definitely worth it, and when the smoke clears, besides admitted curiosity, I am happy with how things turned out as far as the titles we received. Thanks for joining me on this edition of NJ Today here on Mishmashers.com. And what are your thoughts on the Dark Knight video game that never was? And what are some of your favorite Batman video games? For an extra fun, which one's not from the Arkham series? With that said, I'll see you next time.